James Alex Fields, that's the name of the right-wing extremist who, on the afternoon of August 12th, slammed his Dodge Challenger into a group of counter-protesters in Charlottesville, Virginia, one of the most beautiful cities in America. Love it. Been there many, many times. He injured scores of people and killed Heather Heyer. The headlines, Derek, in the days since have revolved almost entirely around the president's remarks first on Saturday, where he ascribed blame to both sides, the left and the right. On Monday, where he seemed to walk that back and assign blame to the right-wing extremists.
But in a video that seemed like a hostage video.
Yeah, well, he was definitely teleprompted. And then on Tuesday, where he backed off of the comments he made the day before and stuck with the both sides argument. And obviously, you know, for political reasons and because it's most interesting and most salacious, the headlines really have revolved almost exclusively around the president's remarks. What's been lost in this mix is a real examination of the alleged crime that was committed by James Alex Fields, and I think it's important that we dive into that, both in terms of the actions that he committed, so we know precisely what it is that he's accused of having done, and also the punishment that might befall him as a result of these crimes and his defenses to those punishments.
Yep.
I'm Jason Beckerman.
And I'm Derek Kaufman.
And this is Behind the Bar. Derek, familiarize us, if you can, with what has he been charged with and by whom, James Alex Fields?
Okay, so James Alex Fields ran the car. 19 people were injured. You mentioned Heather Heyer died, but I think it's an important fact to remember. There were scores of bodies all over the ground. He's been charged in Virginia with three different offenses. He's been charged with 1 count of second-degree murder for the death of Heather Heyer, 3 counts of malicious wounding. Those were the seriously injured people that were part of the 19, and failing to stop at an accident, a hit-and-run kind of charge. Yeah. So these are 3 serious offenses. They're all felonies, but they're not the big, there's not a first-degree murder charge, and that's going to become important to our discussion.
So let's talk for a second about the difference between first-degree murder and second-degree murder. We learn in law school, right, first-degree murder, and everybody sort of knows this from television and elsewhere, that first-degree murder is premeditation.
That's right.
You have to have the intent to kill before you take the ultimate act that results in someone's death. But we also learn in law school that premeditation can be obtained in an instant, in a moment. The moment before someone dies, if you make the intent to kill in your mind, that can be first-degree murder. Why not first-degree murder in this case?
That's right. So a big misconception, as you said, is that premeditation has to be lying in wait or planting a bomb, long in advance. It doesn't. It just has to be instantaneous. The problem they have here is the situation seems to be that there was a crowded street. There were protesters walking along the street, and they were crowding the cars. So there's a couple of cars on 4th Street before he jams on the gas. And what some of the people who support James Alex Fields, some of the alt-right people are saying is that they were actually shaking his car, maybe kicking it a little bit. It's possible that James Alex Fields felt threatened inside his vehicle and panicked and jammed on the gas and then immediately regretted it and saw he hit people and then jams it in reverse and flees. That's also a consistent thing to say when you watch this video. Now, it's unclear whether they were harassing him or whether he actually had anger and wanted to mow down liberals and left his home early in the morning and said, I'm going to go kill some of these protesters. But it's unclear at this point. That's what's I think that's what the second-degree murder charge comes from.
So, but also, we've talked about many times, in order for a prosecution to prove a case, to get a conviction, they must prove every element of an offense. In this case, I think prosecutors avoided charging him with first-degree murder because they didn't think they have enough at this stage, and they can always amend their charges later on. We're not so far down the line that you can't amend the charges. At this point, they don't have the element of proof to show that he formed the intent to kill at any time prior to the actual death. Now, for second-degree murder, you don't need the intent to kill at any point. What you need is an intent to create malice. Malice aforethought is what it's called. And so by driving your car into a crowd and intending to hit those individuals, even though you say, look, I didn't mean to kill anybody, it doesn't matter. That's second-degree murder. Now, if he claims that he was just acting to preserve his own life, he may be setting up an absolute defense to any crime at all. Obviously, we're all familiar with self-defense. Sure. But at the very least, he may be setting up this, more of a malicious, sort of a
wanton disregard
for
life. But that's not first-degree murder.
That's not even second-degree murder. Then you get into homicide charges, sort of
manslaughter.
You remember that Caitlyn Jenner, I think it was Bruce Jenner at the time, was theoretically going to be charged with a manslaughter charge because the allegation that he was looking down at his text messages at the time that he rear-ended someone on the Pacific Coast Highway, they ended up crashing into somebody else and dying. And the idea was, well, if you act negligently, you're nevertheless charged with homicide. And I think that James Alex Field, we haven't heard from him, but the right-wing supporters of his are trying to tee this up as the possible charge, not even a murder charge, more of a homicide charge. And the prosecution's got to be put to their through the task of proving the element of the crime that he intended to drive his car into those people at the time he did.
You're right, and I look at these charges as pretty responsible. There's a real risk when the prosecutors are looking at things of overcharging and ruining the entire case. So
especially in a politically charged atmosphere like this one.
A very highly charged atmosphere in Charlottesville. Everyone wants this guy to be really, really punished, but that's why we have prosecutors who are thoughtful and deliberate about doing this, because the risk here, if you charge him with first-degree murder, you could lose the entire case and he won't get punished at all.
Remember, you got to prove every element of the offense, and you can't prove first-degree murder, or you can't charge first-degree murder, or in the alternative second-degree murder. That's a much more difficult sort of thing to do.
Sure.
So you pick a charge that you think you can prove, and if during the course of the investigation you develop facts, develop evidence, well, a piece of evidence might be here.
Then.
He might have spoken to a friend beforehand, said, I'm going to go out and kill somebody. He may have spoken to a friend beforehand that said, I'm so angry, I've got to go down and do something. These are the kinds of facts that a prosecutor might look to in order to try and up those charges to first-degree murder, possibly. At the same time, prosecutor might say, look, here are the facts, here are the conversations he had. He went out there, he just wanted to take part in the rally. He wasn't frustrated. He was calm, but he wanted to drive his car down and see what he could do to influence the argument from the left or from the right, or in his case from the right, and therefore it might cause the prosecutor to say, boy, it's going to be very difficult for us to prove second-degree murder. Maybe this is a manslaughter charge.
Right. Now, I want to paint some of the atmospherics that also went on in this case. Remember, there's a video that's circulating on the internet that they talked to his mother. So his mother is a wheelchair-bound woman, and they asked her, they said, do you know that your son was the one who plowed that car into all of those people? Her level of surprise was less than you would expect, right? And look, this is beyond the legal. This is the court of public opinion. Many people, if you were told that your daughter plowed into a field of people, you would be outraged, you'd be shocked, you wouldn't know what to do. You'd say it doesn't sound anything like her.
She's 8.
That wasn't the reaction. Just that she's driving, you'd be very surprised. So you didn't get that kind of reaction. And then we started to peel the onion a little bit, and it turns out that there's been a history of 911 calls. His mother is paralyzed from some sort of accident, but she called 911 on several occasions in 2010 and 2011 where she felt threatened by her son. So there may be sort of a pattern of angry, violent outbursts that maybe won't come in as evidence because there's evidentiary reasons to exclude those, but they do start to paint a picture of someone who can't control his temper potentially. Right.
And one other thing, just for atmospherics, again, I'm not even sure how this plays in, but it's a factoid that I heard that I find fascinating. He had written a paper, I think it was in high school, that apparently was very well researched about the history of the Ku Klux Klan, and it was a sympathetic paper. It was certainly written from in a favorable point of view to the Klan, which shows his political views. But at the same time, it was extremely well researched. This is not just sort of the angry white guy who's charging down there, to create mayhem, or maybe it was. But anyway, it doesn't paint the picture of that person. This is a well-reasoned person, which makes him, in many respects, much more frightening than the reactionary.
I think that's right. So let's depart a little bit from the state charges, because one of the things that also happened was that Donald Trump said an investigation is going to be opened, and Jeff Sessions and the Department of Justice is going to open up an investigation.
A federal investigation.
A federal investigation into this. And if this becomes a federal investigation, you'd think the state would step aside at that point. If this is an act of domestic terrorism, is going to be the critical inquiry as to whether this is a federal offense or whether this will just be tried in Virginia.
Let me just set that up for a second. So murder is a state offense. There is no federal charge for murder unless there are specific either federal statutes that are violated or you have things that are crossing state lines. Let's put crossing state lines out of it. So what is the federal statute that's allegedly been violated? This could potentially be charged as a federal crime.
That's right. So it's the Patriot Act. It's 18 U.S.C. 2331 has a definition of domestic terrorism, and it means activities that involve acts dangerous to human life that occur primarily in the U.S. We got both of those here. And here's the kicker: that appear intended to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, influence government policy, or affect the conduct of a government by mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping. So do we have that element? That's always the critical inquiry for a federal investigation. Now, you look at this is where his past is going to come into play. You mentioned that he wrote a very serious defense of the Klan. Now we're going to look to see whether we can link his beliefs with the action, and that's where the domestic terrorism is going to come into play.
Right, and I think did he? I mean, you have to again establish that he intended to commit murder, else you don't really have the act of terrorism at all. But was he doing it with the intent to affect the public sort of discourse and the governmental action as a result, as it relates to these race issues?
Right. Remember the background
and the taking down of the statues
is the Robert E. Lee statue. That was what the protest was. The Unite the Right rally was intended to keep that statue erected because there was a measure that was passed to remove it, and they were protesting that. That's clearly an effort to influence government policy in terms of coordinating a rally. Was his act? Was he there for the rally? Did he commit the act of homicide to further that goal?
Right, and ultimately there's going to be a lot of factual issues that we don't yet know. Once we figure out what his intent was, I think here's what I think. I think if this is second-degree murder, he never intended to kill anybody, just to create mayhem. It's going to be difficult to prove a federal charge here of an act of terror. If, however, they can show that he set out with premeditation to kill somebody and that person was a political opponent, I think it makes it much easier for the feds to step in at that point, and I think they will be inclined to charge him with an act of terror, make it a federal lawsuit, bring it to the federal court. An interesting little, again, an aside, is you can be charged in both federal and then in state court. You're not protected by the Constitution's double jeopardy clause. We're all sort of familiar with that. But these are two separate charges, offenses. Right? You can always be charged with two separate offenses. One would be an act of terror. Then he could also be charged with, if that fails, or I guess if it succeeds too, you could then be charged at the state level with straight up first-degree murder.
That's exactly right. So how do you factor in this element of the case, though, that he was driving down the street, Heather Heyer ended up dying. I don't think he had any previous relationship with Heather.
Right.
The fact that Heather turned out to be somewhat of an activist, we've learned a lot about her after the fact, that she was there as an anti-protester. What if he didn't know what her role was? It turns out that someone who was a counter-protester was killed, but does that matter for the case? Now, what if he killed someone who was actually a white supremacist just like him, and it was just because he rammed the car indiscriminately into a crowd of people?
I think right. What you're looking at is the intent of the person who killed, not necessarily the mindset of the victim here.
That's right.
And if his intent was to kill counter-protesters, even if he accidentally killed a white supremacist Robert E. Lee supporter, then
doesn't really matter.
I think it doesn't really matter at that point. He's going to be charged. So, Derek, of course, the ultimate question in all of these cases is there enough to charge James Allen Fields with a capital crime such that he can be subject to the death penalty?
So at this point in Virginia, no. He's been charged with second-degree murder. We've talked about the reasons for that. That's not a capital offense. That's punishable by 5 to 40 years. They do have capital punishment in Virginia, and if they find evidence to up the charge to first-degree murder, now we've got a capital offense. So we're really going to have to look elsewhere. We're going to have to look back on the federal side. So on the federal side, can they hang this domestic terrorism charge on him? We've talked about it. It's going to be maybe an awkward fit, but there's a lot of different crimes that might fit this bill. Willful destruction of an aircraft or motor vehicle resulting in death is the type of act of domestic terrorism. Do you have enough here, you think, Jason, for turning your car into a missile to maim a crowd of people?
I think this is really going to ride on whether or not they can establish that he had a premeditated intent to kill, which would make it into a first-degree crime. And as we've discussed, although he's charged with a second-degree murder now, it could be changed to a first-degree murder if they find that he set out with the intent to kill. And if that happens, he did destroy a motor vehicle. So this is the kind of classic case that this would be set up for, someone who drives a truck into a building, Timothy McVeigh style, uses a vehicle in order to create a mass death. If they can establish that he drove his car at a rapid rate of speed into a group of people in order to kill, I do think you have enough then to charge him with an act of terror, or frankly, under Virginia's law, to charge him with first-degree murder. And under either scenario, I do think the death penalty is at play. But as we know the facts right now, it's a stretch as we know them right now, especially because he has only been charged with second-degree murder under Virginia law.
That's right.
But while we're at it, the one other thing I wanted to address is there's the term hate crime is thrown around a lot, and that hate crime is one of those things that can be added to any charge to make it into a higher charge. And when death results, you can often establish a death penalty based on the existence of a hate crime. Hate crimes are traditionally, right, you kill somebody because of their race, their religion, their creed, something along those lines. So the question for you is it enough that this man allegedly killed somebody because of their political views in order to charge them as a hate crime under federal law?
I don't think so. I think hate crime legislation is very specific. You have to commit this crime against someone in what we call a protected class. So as you pointed out, gender, race, creed, national origin, religion, those are the types of things that we think about as that's why you're targeting that person. That fits into a hate crime. Killing liberals or people with different political beliefs, that doesn't really fit cleanly into hate crime legislation, at least as it's currently constituted. I don't think you could really draft legislation where you're killing someone who you have a difference of opinion with. I mean, that is just a crime at that point.
Yeah, I mean, hate crime is a very controversial legislation at all because there's already some First Amendment views, whether, the opinions you hold and you kill somebody based on sort of an animus to them, isn't that protected? In any event, we don't have to get down in the weeds, but I think to add to your point, to add into that list of hate crime categories or protected classes, some sort of an opinion or a political bias that you have is really a stretch too far. Probably wouldn't pass constitutional muster. I don't think hate crime applies here, and therefore you couldn't establish a death penalty charge based on the existence of a hate crime in this case. So just to wrap this thing up, Derek, as the days go by and the raw emotions of the president's comments, I think, begins to wither, you're going to get more of a discussion about the ultimate fate, the crime that was committed, and the ultimate fate here. And I think you and I are in agreement on this. First-degree murder seems like an unlikely charge. Seems to be charged with second degree. The question is, does he look for a plea, or does he try to really establish this idea that he was in fear for his life? That's a long, hard slog, and I'm sure the president and others on the right don't want to have this battled out in court on a day-in, day-out basis.
I think that's exactly right. They're not looking for a long fight, but I don't think he's going to get offered a very sweet deal. This was very public. Emotions are running very high. Prosecutors, especially in Virginia, are going to want to really make an sort of this guy. We've seen Terry McAuliffe has been every opportunity, the governor of Virginia, standing at the podium and railing against sort of the white nationalists. So I can see offering a plea deal, but not a very good one for him. I think he's going to do significant time in prison.
That's right. All right. With that, Parker, give us some mail time here.
Mail time. Remember to write in your questions and comments to behindthebar@tmz.com. Two for today. First one up is from Tabby. A jury has ruled in favor of Taylor Swift and ruled that Mueller did indeed commit sexual assault. They awarded Taylor her $1. So is that it? If they ruled that he committed sexual assault, wouldn't there be a criminal case following?
Right. Derek and I did a piece on this story, a podcast on the story a number of months back. What was his name? What was
David Mueller.
David Mueller. David Mueller was was accused by Taylor Swift of during a photo op, a meet and greet. When he put his hand behind her back, sort of in the traditional take a picture with a celebrity kind of pose, he instead reached his hand up her skirt and grabbed her bare ass. I guess she was, wearing thong underwear or whatever, and so grabbed a bare cheek.
And we zaprudered that picture, man. We turned it every which way.
We did. That was one of my favorite podcasts we ever did. That I thought I really liked that one.
Yep.
But in any event, he initially sued her. She complained to he was a radio DJ. She complained to the studio head at the radio. He fired Mueller as a result. Mueller then sued her for defamation, claiming he never touched her, and she defamed him, and therefore he lost his job. She then countersued, which she wouldn't have done before, saying that you sexually assaulted me. The jury ruled completely in her favor after, and she was apparently fantastic on the stand. We don't have any audio video. The state in which it took place, Colorado, doesn't offer audio and video from the courtroom, but all the reports out of there was that she did a sensational job on the stand, and they found entirely for her. But at what cost to the system, to Mueller? I mean, what happened here?
Yeah, look, I mean, we've talked about this a lot. She only ended up suing for $1. She said this was just to make a statement about sexual assault out there in the world, and she sort of invited this spectacle. She said, look, you've sued me. I'm countersuing just for $1. I'm not trying to take your money away from you. I understand you lost your job, but she wanted this played out in court. And I actually think that's a bit abusive of the system of justice. I mean, this was hugely expensive. They had to occupy the courtroom. They had to go through tons of motions practice.
Bailiffs,
the judges needed to be available.
Court reporters. The entire jury was paneled. This trial took many days, and the lawyers spent thousands of hours preparing for this at substantial cost to both Taylor and Mueller. And to what end? I mean, look, I can see it from both sides, right? She got $1. The system wasted millions of dollars. The lawyers got rich, as they always do. And all she got was $1 and a verdict against this guy, which I guess was the point that she had all along. And I can see that, right? You don't want to let these crimes go unpunished.
That's right. And I can see, look, he picked the fight. He fired the first shot. She was defending herself. If she had just sued him for sexual assault over the ass grab, I would feel very differently about this whole situation. I'd say, look, she's just trying to play this out in court. She wants a large spectacle where one isn't really warranted, and her money could be better deployed to women's rights groups and so forth, which is, I think, a more appropriate vehicle to have those kind of views. But look, he fired the shot, and he took on Taylor Swift, who's got the deepest pockets in the world, and he lost.
Let me ask you a question that's going to put you at a politically correct disadvantage here, and that is this. David Mueller, in a single moment of stupidity, reached up, allegedly, and the jury found, in a moment of stupidity, reached up and grabbed her ass. There was no testimony to say that he had a pattern and practice of doing this. He did it in one stupid instance. As a result, he lost his job. His name is mud. He had to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees to defend himself, and seems like, and I know that he lost a relationship as a result of this. It seems like his life may be ruined as a result. Is that too harsh, too large a penalty to pay for the act that he committed?
Boy, you really did put me.
I
you really did put
want
me
to
in
know
it, because
your
you're right.
answer.
Look, this is. I think it's hard to have sympathy for David Mueller. Look, he grabbed. You're not supposed to grab women. This is not the 1950s where you can have a firm slap after a job well done. But I do think there are much more serious offenses. I think it's unfortunate that an entire life is ruined over a single moment. And in that sense, I'll only go that far. How about you?
Oh, I'm much more sympathetic to Taylor Swift than you are. I think she's a victim.
I thought you would just stand on that.
You
high
can grab
horse.
my ass for $1 anytime you want.
Fair enough.
Well, he did not have to sue her.
That's true.
That's true. And he picked that fight. That's why sympathy.
Next one up is from Danny. After the police dropped their investigation of Ezekiel Elliott, the NFL conducted their own and found him guilty to the point where they suspended him for 6 games. In a situation like this, will the police's case be reopened, or is a dropped case a dropped case?
Depends what the NFL found, right? If they found good evidence that he committed this crime and therefore they based their suspension on it, they could.
They could, although the standard is entirely different.
Yeah.
The NFL conducted an investigation. It has entirely different policies in mind. It's trying to protect its league against a bad image. The criminal justice system is trying to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he committed a crime. Very, very different standards. So it makes perfect sense to me that you could be suspended by your league but entirely exonerated in the criminal justice system.
And here's what's important to remember. The league does not have to have proof of anything. According to the collective bargaining agreement, right, you just have to simply think that it's in the best interest of the league to suspend this guy for 6 days. Now, the league...
6 games.
6 games, sorry. The league certainly has policies in place to not suspend people who are innocent of crimes.
And he's got the Players Association behind him to fight this fight.
But the league did their investigation. They came to whatever conclusions they came to. Those conclusions have not been made public. But by virtue of the extensive suspension and the loss of 40% of the season for him, they obviously found that he committed a pretty heinous crime. And it's, by the way, much larger suspension than Tom Brady got for doctoring footballs, than who was the individual who allegedly raped the woman in the hotel room?
You mean
Greg Hardy.
Greg Hardy.
Greg Hardy got 4 games for an alleged act of domestic violence, although he was eventually on appeal. That case was thrown out against him. The criminal case was. So it was a pretty hefty suspension. That's a big deal for America's team to lose their best player for 6 days.
That's right. The NFL's got an image problem, and they've had it for a while with Ray Rice and so forth. So I think Ezekiel committed these acts allegedly after knowing that the league was really stamping down on these things.
Yeah, talk about having no sympathy. I mean, at least I'm sure you have some sympathy for Ezekiel. I have none, though.
Yeah. I hate you.
That's it for mail time.
All right, thanks very much, everybody. We'll be back again next week with another exciting edition of Behind the Bar.